Hi, I'm June Lavelle, and I would like to welcome you to Resiliency Gardens, where we're working to reduce our carbon footprint by promoting the production and consumption of locally grown food. Today, I want to discuss on how we can remove our food and garden waste from landfills and turn it into a rich organic fertilizer and natural pesticide. Over 35 billion kilo of food waste is dumped into EU landfills every year. Landfills are our largest source of methane, a greenhouse gas that contributes to global warming and gets emitted when organic waste, such as food, decomposes. Composting your food waste is one of the easiest and most powerful actions you can take to lower your climate change footprint and improve our planet's health. All plants, including grass, trees, shrubs, and agricultural crops, depend on the soil food web for their nutrition. Poor soil grows poor plants. Improving garden soil is an ongoing process since plants leach nutrients, leaving the soil inadequate for their needs. You have two options to replace the needed nutrients. You can use toxic chemical fertilizers, or you can use organic fertilizer that's better for plant health, human health, and the planet's health. Composting is the natural process of recycling organic matter, such as leaves and food scraps, into a valuable fertilizer that can enrich soil and plants. There are three common methods for composting at home, but today we're going to learn about vermicomposting. Vermicomposting, also known as worm composting, is the result of earthworms decomposing organic matter to produce a usable, fertile source of worm poop that supplies vital nutrients and beneficial microbes to soil and plants. There are literally thousands of species of worms that can generally be categorized into three types: fishing worms, composting worms, and garden aeration worms. Red wigglers are the best and most commonly used worms for vermicomposting. Red wigglers are preferred because of their voracious appetite, their high level of reproduction, and their ability to convert organic matter into vermicompost within 45 to 50 days. There are many advantages of vermicomposting. It's easy to do year-round and can be done indoors and in other small spaces, like on a balcony. In addition to being more nutritious for your plants, vermicomposting is more environmentally friendly, and it doesn't have any side effects on your health like chemical fertilizers do. It's also a business opportunity where you can earn good money from selling worms, finished compost, and worm tea. Worm bins are found in thousands of classrooms ranging from kindergarten through high school. Having a worm bin at home or in the classroom is a great way for students to learn about organic decomposition, the soil food web, and the relationship between earthworms and ecological sustainability. You don't need anything fancy or expensive to start vermicomposting other than a ventilated container, moist bedding, starter soil, food, and of course, worms. You can use a variety of containers for your worm bin, including plastic, glass, and wooden containers. Here are two examples of vermicomposting bins. The one on the left is a do-it-yourself bin made from common storage containers, while the one on the right is a commercially available worm bin. To make a do-it-yourself worm bin, you will need to collect these materials, starting with 2 or 3 storage containers, an electric drill, and a 4mm drill bit, a couple of bricks or empty food containers to use as spacers to separate the bins, some dried leaves or mulch, a few cups of garden soil, a few sheets of newspaper to use as bedding, and of course, red worms. Start by drilling 20 to 30 holes in the bottom of the first bin. This will allow the liquid that is naturally created by the worm's work to drain into a second outside bin or into a tray underneath to catch the liquid. The next step is to drill about 20 to 30 small holes in the lid of the inside bin and around the top edge of the second outside bin to provide ventilation for the worms. Because the plastic bins will be stacked together, you will need to place something between the bins to provide about 10 to 15 centimeters of space between each. In the picture on the bottom, 2 strips of wood have been used, but empty plastic food containers turned upside down are also a good choice for this purpose. Worms need moist bedding, and torn newspaper is an excellent choice. Avoid using colored print since it may be toxic to the worms. Place newspaper strips into a large plastic garbage bag or container. Spray with water until bedding feels like a damp sponge. It should be moist but not dripping. If it gets too wet, add more dry strips. Fill the bottom of the bin with about 8 to 10 centimeters of the newspaper strips, making sure the bedding is fluffy and not packed down so that there's enough air for the worms. On top of the layer of bedding, add 3 to 4 cups of soil, and if you get some cow, horse, or sheep manure, add that too. Now it's time to add your worms and then cover them with a sheet of damp, corrugated cardboard. Worms love damp cardboard. Worm bins can be stored almost anywhere, as long as the temperature is between 5 and 26 degrees Celsius. But it's best in an environment with a fairly constant median temperature. Worms are easy to take care of, although they may need a couple of days after being released into the bin to get used to their new surroundings before feeding them. Worms eat half their weight in food each day. 1/2 kg of food is needed for 1 kg of worm. Here's a list of foods that worms love and foods that they hate. It's best to tear large scraps of food into small pieces for them. If worms are dying or try to crawl out, the conditions are probably either too wet, too dry, or too acidic. If the bin is too wet, add more bedding. If too dry, moisten the bedding. If too acidic, add crushed eggshells. When the bedding is used up, it's time to harvest the bin. The ideal temperature for worms is between 15 and 25 degrees Celsius. They can survive in temperatures as low as 5 degrees and as high as 30 degrees, but they will not reproduce at these temperatures. To keep their environment healthy, don't use too much fresh manure or soil, and don't tumble or turn the worms. Worms are hermaphrodites, meaning they have both male and female reproductive organs. However, they cannot reproduce alone. They must pair with another worm for successful reproduction to occur. If you maintain a good environment for your worms, the average worm can live to be around 5 years old. During the decomposition, food waste releases liquid, which is called leachate. This leachate seeps down through the worm composter into the collection area in the bottom of the outer bin. The leachate should be drained regularly. If you're getting more than 60 to 120 milliliters of liquid in a week, the composter is probably too wet, and so add more bedding. While leachate can have value as a liquid fertilizer, it can sometimes contain harmful pathogens. Since you will likely not be able to test the leachate for pathogens, we recommend just pouring it out in a place away from your plants. After about 3 to 6 months of being fed, your worms will have created enough compost to harvest. To prepare for harvesting, do not add new food to the bin for 2 weeks. Then try one of 2 methods to harvest the compost. The first is to push all of the worm bin contents to one side of the bin, removing any large pieces of undecomposed food, as shown in the section on the left. Put fresh bedding and food scraps in the empty side of the bin, as shown on the right. Continue burying food scraps only in the freshly bedded half. Over the next 2 to 3 weeks, the worms will move over to the side where the food is, leaving their compost behind. To encourage worm migration, cover the new side of the bin with moist corrugated cardboard and leave the old side to dry out. Since worms need moisture, they will leave the dry side. After their migration, you can remove the compost and replace the old section with fresh bedding and new food. The second method is the light method. Worms hate light. They will do their best to dig themselves back into darker environments when they encounter light. While the light method is a little tedious, it's also fascinating. Place a pile of vermicompost on a flat surface in the sun or under a bright light. Wait a minute or so as the worms work their way into the compost to escape the light source. Scrape the top and sides of the pile. Repeat this step until all you have is a pile of worms. There are several ways to tell when the compost is finished. It will have a dark brown color and will be crumbly, loose, and humus-like. You should not be able to recognize the food scraps, leaves, or other feedstock that you started with. If any materials are remaining, you can just pick them out during the harvesting. Compost is one of the best sources of organic matter to use as a soil amendment, since it's so rich in nutrients. It can also help break down dense or compacted soil and helps retain water in sandy soils. Compost can also be used as a surface mulch, which protects the soil from temperature extremes and helps maintain soil moisture. Spread the compost to a depth of about 6 or 7 centimeters when using it as mulch. When using it as a surface mulch around trees and shrubs, make sure you don't pile up the compost next to the trunk, because that creates an ideal environment for insects which can attack the plant. So be sure to keep the compost 7 to 10 centimeters away from the trunk. You can then spread it out to the drip line, which is the area directly located under the outer circumference of the tree branches. Compost can replace peat in preparing potting mixes, but you must make sure that the compost is very mature and finely screened. Use this recipe for homemade potting mix to get the right proportion of compost to the other materials. By brewing worm castings in water, vermicompost can be made into a highly effective liquid organic fertilizer and natural pesticide known as worm compost tea. The microbes that are contained in worm tea protect plants from diseases and help plants to heal infections on their root and leaf surfaces. Worm compost tea is brewed by either soaking a porous bag full of worm castings in water or simply dumping the castings into a container of water. It's best if the water is chemical-free, such as rainwater or distilled water. If you add 2 tablespoons of sugar, molasses, or corn syrup to the water, it will stimulate the growth of the beneficial microorganisms. And if you submerge a fish tank bubbler in the tea and let it brew for 24 to 72 hours, you can greatly increase the number of microorganisms. While you can use either a watering can or a spray bottle to apply the worm tea on both outdoor garden plants and house plants, it is absorbed more quickly and distributed throughout the plant more efficiently when it's sprayed on a plant's leaves. The best time to apply worm tea is in the morning or evening, when plants can best absorb the nutrients. You can repeat sprays every 2 to 4 weeks throughout the growing season. At Resiliency Gardens, we believe that everyone should be making compost. It's easy to make at home, at school, or at work. And by making your own compost, you're producing a highly valuable organic fertilizer and natural pesticide that you can either use on your own plants or sell to other gardeners. Perhaps the most important reason to make compost is to help save our planet. By composting, you're doing your part to keep food waste out of our landfills, which is essential for reducing the emission of harmful methane gas, which contributes to global warming. Thank you for your help.